I have Pastor Dave Katsma with me this week. Pastor Dave, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Can you take a minute or two to introduce yourself?
Sure. Dave Katsma, and I am from Marshview Ministries in Horicon. We were a church plant, hard to believe, 23 years ago, and still consider us a church plant. So we've been here in the big city of Horicon, about 3,600 people, and doing ministry here. So, and kind of work for Classis as well as a part-time, working with the Home Missions Committee. So,
You've got some other work for the denomination too, right?
yeah, I also work with Peter Kelder, who is the regional director for Resonate, which is the Home Missions, World Missions combination. And so I am part of a local mission leader. So he's got a team that consists of the 5 of us from, I think it is 11 different classes that he oversees. And he's got some representatives from 4 of the different classes, and then we work with them.
Great. And I mean, you're one of the busiest guys probably Classis work-wise. You also teach the LDN program.
Correct. Yeah, the LDN is the Leadership Development Network. I think I've been doing that for about 12 or 13 years now. I think this is our 13th year of doing that, and here in Wisconsin. And that's open to people of the churches of Classis Wisconsin, and we both men and women. And it's designed originally for raising up. When it came out of the Chicago areas where we brought it from, and it was originally brought up to do look for church planters. And what we've done here in Wisconsin is to keep our eye open for that, but mostly it's to help train church leaders, lay people, and biblical theology and church history and the creeds and confessions and practical ministry over a 3-year period of time. And I have a tendency to put a evangelistic twist to all of it as we go through. So trying to keep that missional fervor kind of alive in Classis, Wisconsin.
One of the things you can do at the end of the LDN program is get your license to exhort, is the fancy name for it, or have the blessing of the Classis to preach at any of the churches in the Classis. The list that we renew every year is quite long. Do you have any idea how many, and maybe you don't know this number, how many licensed to exhort people you taught?
I think there are, that I know of that list, and I think there is like 12 altogether. I think 3/4 of those had gone through the LDN program. I think there's only there's 4 that I know of that have not gone. So
Sure.
About 2/3 of that list have gone through the LDN.
That's crazy. You're raising up leaders, Pastor Dave.
Well, the program is,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
God is, not me.
So the question we ask every week is, what are you working on? So what are you working on? What text are you dealing with this week?
This week is kind of, I just finished up a series. And so this is kind of a transitional week as I'm looking at, coming into this next couple of weeks. I'm looking at John chapter 17, Jesus' high priestly prayer for God's glory. Jesus is going to be leaving his disciples soon, so he encourages them in chapters 14, 15, and 16, and then he prays for them and himself in chapter 17. And the focus is going to be working on verse 18, where it says that Jesus says, just as you sent me into the world, I sent them into the world also. And so again, it's going to have a little bit of a missional flair to it as we preach. So
that text in John 17 and I'm thinking off the top of my head, so correct me if I'm wrong. But I think there's some really important evidence for the Trinity in there, right? Is that where he says, I pray that they might be one just as you and I are one, and some language like that? That's pretty important to that theology.
Yeah, very important. And you really get to see the divinity of Christ in there, as he is, praised that his service gives glory to God and that he is going to be glorified as well, the same glory that he had from all eternity. And so there is this eternal divinity part to Jesus's prayer that does lend to his deity. Yep.
Are you going to spend time in there, or are you going to spend most of the time on Jesus' prayer for all believers?
I think I usually work in series.
Sure.
And so this time I think I'm going to focus on the aspect of Jesus's mission in this, that he came into the world for the purpose of, our salvation for the elect, because that's very strong through that, that whole passage is that he has those disciples because God had given them to him from all eternity. And so there's that election part of it. There is I think the aspect of worship, because he's giving glory to the Father as he has received glory. So that glory, but there's also the missional part, that he did the work that he came to do. And so I'm going to be focusing on the next couple of weeks on the idea. So the first one I want to do is the kind of the missional part, the sending part, but then reflecting back. I'm going to kind of work backwards through the passage and to say, why, what did he accomplish in this mission? What was he sent to do? And then just keep working backwards to that whole election aspect of it, that God has chosen, which then comes back around to the missional part, whereas that we can go out in mission knowing that God has elected people, and that would be coming to him, from that message that came originally from the disciples. So I'm going to wander around John 17 for a while.
I get a question along the lines from students. I get a question along the lines of, if everyone's elect, why do we do missions? Kind of question, right? So if you're doing a series about our being sent out, and what you're working back to is how God has given him all those he's called, kind of thing. Why or how does election inspire us to do missions? Students seem to think that it does the opposite. You know what I mean?
Yep. And that's been kind of the catch-22, right? Because if you think about it, if God is elect, why do that? Would be kind of the hyper-Calvinistic view of missions. It's like, oh, they're already saved, or they're already called, preordained, why do mission? But I think the beauty of it is that we can go out in mission knowing that there is this process that God's working in advance and working in the hearts of people, and we get to be that ambassador, that missionary, that representative, and bring the message that, I guess, maybe continues the work that God is already doing in their heart, and we get to see the fruit of that, and see the fruit of God's faithfulness in that sense. Because in some traditions, the emphasis is all on the person and all on the message and kind of making the sale to get that person to come to faith, right? But in a Reformed view, we get to work alongside of God. He's already working in advance, and we can go out with confidence knowing that, hey, there's some that are going to be responding positively because God is already at work in their life, bringing them to himself.
Yeah. Part of the reason that doctrine is really comforting is because the onus isn't on us. Mm-hmm. And I've heard that connection made in parenting as well, is that we raise our children in the Lord, but election is a doctrine it's a pastoral doctrine. It's a doctrine that brings us comfort, because if and when at times our children grow up to be unbelievers, it's not a failure of our parenting per se, right? I mean, it's a sad thing to know your children might not be believing, but it is,
Very sad.
but it is encouraging to know that it's still in the Lord's hands.
Yeah.
I haven't doomed them because I parented them wrong.
Right.
They belong to God or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is really the thrust, I think, of most of our evangelistic efforts, is that, it's all about God. And even in, Jesus's high priestly prayer there in John 17, he talks about how they would not wander away from the faith because they are secure in their election. But then he does give that little caveat about Judas, that Judas was destined for destruction, and so there's that reality of, I don't want to call it a dual predestination, because that's not what it is, but it is the reality is that God calls out of those who are doomed those to be saved. And so that gives us the hope in a merciful God.
How long are you going to spend in John 17? How many sermons?
That would be nice to know. Maybe you could give me some hints there, Zach.
Are you just going week to week with it?
Well, that's a lot of times how I kind of do my series. I will start in on it, and then I'll just keep seeing more out of it until the passage I don't want to say the passage runs dry, but I see what's coming out of it.
Sure.
And that's
what the Lord's saying to you in your congregation. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And that's that interplay between me and the congregation. Sure. And so I kind of open-end things and start in, and then I never not quite know where it's going to end.
So are you typically, when you say series, is it typically books of the Bible or chapters like John 17?
I mix it up.
Okay.
A lot of times it is kind of I work with a passage and I'll glean out of that a number. The last couple of my last series was a little bit more topical. It dealt with fear, anxiety, and worry, and what the Bible tells us as believers, with the aim that, looking at it as that God is sovereign and almighty and he's powerful. And so that theme keeps coming back into, how do we address our worry as human beings, is not to look at the problem, but look at the God behind all things.
Sure.
That's a powerful God. So
how can we be praying for Marshview Ministries?
I think like most churches, I hate to come back to the whole COVID thing, but COVID took its toll on us as well. And I talked to a lot of pastors along the way that, we've not lost, but maybe has not seen as many young families come back to church as what we had before. And so we've been seeing new people coming into the congregations throughout this time. But not the younger families that we are typically seeing come in. And so we've been going through a process right now, too, of prayer and discernment on, where is God opening opportunities for us as a church to minister and to reach out into our community. So we've been the last couple of months in a time of prayer and discernment. So you could definitely keep that in your guys' prayer about our prayers.
Yeah, we will. Thanks for your time. I hope I didn't set you too far back this week.
Not at all.
Appreciate you coming on.
Yep. I appreciate being interviewed, Zach. And you weren't near as scary as what I thought it was going to be.
I forget who, maybe it was when I had Jason Rice the first week. I was a journalism student in college. I was going to be a journalist, and they always drilled in us, never give your interviewee final edit privileges. Never tell them you'll send it to them and let them look it over. But I've always said to all the different guys who've been on, if you want to see it, if you want to edit something, that's fine. So I would not have made a good journalist.
All right. Yeah. Well, I think it'd make a great pastor. So
yeah, God put me in the right direction, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Pastor Dave.
All right. Thank you.